Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, great. So I'll kind of crack on. I wasn't sure whether this was going to be on a webinar or on a meeting sort of Zoom link. So it's on a meeting link, which means we don't have the Q&A function on Zoom. So I've set it up on Slido, which we've used before. And hopefully you've used it in kind of other things. So if you go into slido.com, or just type in Slido, which you can see on the first bullet point there. It will ask you for a hashtag and use the hashtag 6med, and that will take you to, I will just go on to that. That will take you to the website, and hopefully you will be able to see the kind of 6med webinar dashboard, and you can pop your questions for the Q&A onto there, and also you can kind of do the sort of upvoting, so I can see which questions to answer. I'm also going to activate the poll, which is just to kind of give me an idea what kind of level to sort of pitch this at. So again, that's slido.com and hashtag 6med. And then we can sort of begin there. So it'll be good, and feel free to pop in the chat as well what sort of level you guys are at in terms of how much quantitative reasoning you've done, whether you just sort of know the basics or whether you've kind of done lots of questions. I see someone has a few people have now answered the poll, which is useful. And it looks like we've got a bit of a spread. A few people who haven't kind of looked at QR at all, which is good. So I'll kind of take you through from the basics. And yeah, as I said, if you go into the sort of audience Q&A part, you should be able to add your questions. Let me have a look in the chat what people have said. Sonica saying you can't see the poll, so that's the poll is on Slido. It's not on Zoom, so if you can go into slido.com. Yeah, I asked them to set it up as a webinar, but unfortunately it has a meeting. So I am going to continue while you guys kind of do that in the background. So let me start my slides. So welcome to the 6med surgery. So in terms of who I am, I've kind of said this before, but some of you may be new. So I'm the kind of student ambassador. I'm a 5th year medic at Cambridge. I'll be starting 6th year actually very soon. And I've kind of done various things. So I filmed the masterclass videos, and I've done the kind of blog posts, and I now do these sort of surgeries. So this is the 4th one in this series. I also did these last year, but this year the format's a little bit different. And you can kind of see some of my stats there. So the UCAT, I did it back when it was the UCAT. And quantitative reasoning, I didn't really mind that as a section. My mental maths is pretty decent. And just with all the other kind of sections, the worst thing about it was that sort of timing. I don't really like the calculator because it's so slow. So I kind of resigned myself to doing mental maths for all of it, and did fairly well in the section. So in terms of the kind of Q&A part of the webinar, I'll kind of allocate some time for it, and we'll also do some practice questions for quantitative reasoning. But the questions that you put for the Q&A can be about absolutely anything, so any part of the application process. And I'll try to answer as many as I can, but obviously I'll have to prioritize the ones that I've kind of got the most upvotes. So if you could vote up the questions that you like on Slido, and therefore I know kind of which ones are most helpful to the most number of people. Yeah, that's just a summary of what we're going to do today. And if I don't get round to answering your question, feel free to send it to team@6med.co.uk, and hopefully one of the team will be able to get back to you with that. So let's go on to quantitative reasoning. So let me check the poll now and see how we're doing. So yeah, nearly all of you filled that in, and it looks like about half of you have done some QR questions, which is good. And some of you kind of are at a slightly more beginner level, and it looks like maybe a couple of people feel pretty good about it, which is good. So hopefully these questions that I've kind of got will be a decent sort of starting point. But let's do some of the basics. So QR, it's the third section. So by the time you start this in the exam, you'll be, 52 minutes in. So you'll be kind of going over the halfway mark during this section. This is when you'll kind of be right in the middle. You'll be sort of, getting into the flow of it. And yeah, as you can see, 36 questions, 24 minutes. So the timing is quite tight. And here's some kind of basic information on it. The slides and the recording will all be available, by the way, so don't worry about kind of having to note anything down. So that kind of works out to less than 40 seconds per question if you're kind of leaving some time at the end to go and check. So when you're practicing, actually aiming for something like 30 or 35 seconds per question on average would be good in terms of giving yourself some time at the end. And in terms of kind of how they present the information, it's a mixture of essentially any way to present numerical information. So it could be kind of tables and charts, it could be graphs, it could be in kind of word problems. And it's essentially your sort of test of handling data and being able to kind of actually do things with data. So it won't necessarily just be picking numbers directly out of a table, but it will actually be having to do something with them, having to do kind of calculations. And so there are two kind of main question types in this. There are some where you have the same kind of data set, and then there are 4 questions relating to this. And then you also get kind of standalone questions. So, it's just one data set, one question, and then it moves on to the next one. All of them are picking the correct option out of a possible 5. So I've tried to mimic that with the kind of mock questions I've got. And at the bottom there, that's taken directly from the UCAT website. So that's a summary of some of the kind of key skills that you'll need to know from your sort of GCSE maths. So it's nothing really that difficult. I know that some people really struggle with their maths, and that's obviously means that this is a section you'll need to kind of work a little bit harder on. But most of you, I'm sure, will be very comfortable with your maths. You'll probably be doing it at kind of A level or equivalent, and so none of this will be too kind of difficult conceptually. But the difficulty comes in having to do this with that time pressure, and making kind of silly mistakes, and easily making kind of calculation errors, and also kind of that nuanced skill of when to use mental maths and when to potentially use the calculator to make things easier. I've also kind of put some tips alongside the answers for the questions. So I'll kind of talk through those as well, because there are some kind of little tricks you can use. But generally speaking, this is a section where you could potentially use the calculator as well as the whiteboard. So yeah, there will be kind of lots to do, and the more questions you do, the more timed questions you do, the more you'll find kind of things that work for you in terms of general kind of strategies. So I've got, so the first example question I've actually taken from the official website. So you may have done it. I'm sorry if you have, but I thought it would be good to show an example of kind of their standard, and it's just kind of one question. And then I've got some later, which I've kind of made up, which I've tried to pitch at a slightly easier level, because I thought most of you are going to be kind of at the more beginning level. So yeah, we will see. But if you get kind of just some paper ready, and if you have a calculator, obviously if we were doing this as sort of as close to the exam as we could replicate, you'd have the sort of on-screen calculator. But this is just for a bit of practice. So I'll give you guys 40 seconds for this question. I'll give you just a little bit of time to get things together. And then I'll kind of show the answer. So let me just check Slido while you guys get things ready. Okay, lots of questions already, which is excellent. And we will get to that after this question. But okay, I'm going to switch to the question in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. That's 30 seconds. And that's time. So that would be roughly, if you were giving yourself the sort of maximum of 40 seconds per question, that would be how long you'd have for this question. I think that's definitely doable. But with a question like this, and generally speaking with QR, there are some approaches that you need to take. So I'll show the answer if it'll let me. There we go. So I've kind of zoomed in, so hopefully you can see that. But the answer there is E, which is 18 liters. And the actual maths that's done isn't too difficult. So generally, when you're approaching QR questions, I would always recommend you sort of either read the sort of top stem or skip directly to the question first. Essentially, what you need to do is figure out what you're actually looking for. There's no point in sort of reading the table or looking sort of fully at the graph or the chart or whatever it is. Because generally there'll be lots of information you don't need to answer the question, and they actually mention that in their sort of description of the section. It's about picking out the information that you actually need. So there's no point kind of wasting time with that. So I would kind of read the question first, be very particular, and be very sort of pedantic about units, and anywhere where they might try and trick you. So, for example, putting down sort of things in months, and then they give it overall in years, or different units. Anywhere where you might need to sort of manipulate the information, because that's a very easy way of making a silly mistake. So here you would just have to kind of firstly work out in simple terms what do you actually need to do. So you need to essentially work out how much fuel consumption is kind of presented in this question, and then you'd sort of work that out as that's what the sort of 12 times 5 times 25 is, and then you'd obviously have to work it out as a kind of multiplication, and then an easy way to find the difference is to take the difference of the smaller numbers, so that kind of saves you some time. And then again, it's just about kind of keeping the numbers straight in your head, making sure you don't make any errors when you plug it into the calculator. You maybe would do this with kind of mental maths. This one might be a little bit more challenging, but it's certainly doable. So that's an example of a question that's they sort of give on the official website. So you can see the kind of style of the question. And they have plenty there. They have a sort of question bank for each of the section as well. So I'd recommend going through that, getting an additional question bank, whether that's the sort of UCAT Ninja or whatever you sort of want to use, because the sort of online question banks are going to replicate the exam more closely compared to say the book, for example. So I'm going to give just 10 minutes. Really hope my voice holds up. And I'm going to go through some of the Q&A questions. So I might actually just very quickly get a drink. So I'll give you guys just a little bit of time to add any more questions you want to add. And then if you upvote any questions that you kind of like the look of and want me to answer. And then I'll spend the next 10 minutes kind of answering them, and then we'll go back to do some more practice questions and then finish off with the Q&A. So let me just quickly grab a drink. Any of my fellow hay fever sufferers, I hope you're doing okay at the moment as well. Okay, I'm back. And so, okay, so there are quite a few questions that have got some pretty high upvotes. I see something in the chat as well. So if you can't access Slido, then feel free to put your questions in the chat. But I will have to prioritize the Slido ones because I know kind of how many people have upvoted them. So the Slido code is #6med. Yeah, and to Sandra, I think someone's actually asked that question as well, so I'll probably get onto your question anyway. But the first one is, how long roughly do you need to study to get very high UCAT/BMAT results, like 3,000 UCAT or 6s and 4A in BMAT in terms of days per hour, per day, or total hours? So this question, I think it's come up every time actually so far. Came up a lot last year as well. The answer is very nuanced, I'm afraid to say. I think if you're going to be safe and give yourself enough time to spread things out, um, I think you want to kind of be studying over at least a sort of 6-week period. So let's say, if you're sitting the UCAT at the end of August, for example, you'd want to be starting at least sort of mid-July. So that's kind of the breadth of or sort of length of study time. Now, in terms of kind of hours per week or hours per day, really it sort of depends on how you want to approach the revision process. So if you're starting directly from scratch, you'll want some time to sort of familiarize yourself with what each of the sections are, both for the BMAT and the UCAT. And then you'll need to go into the kind of first phase of, working through what the different question types are, trying to kind of apply your techniques to different questions, and then the kind of second phase of starting to refine it, do more timed questions, and then get into the sort of third phase of timed mocks and sort of stepping up your revision. So if you spread it all out, you really shouldn't need to do more than say sort of an hour a day to start off with, if that, in the sort of beginning process. Because you essentially want to sort of step it up. So I think the best approach would be if you sort of write down everything you need to do. So what stage you're at, where you need to be. So with each of the sections, how confident do you feel? What do you need to revise for each of the sections? That will give you a good idea of how much time you need to put into it. Then what you want to do is kind of set yourself sort of timelines for when you want to start the sort of next phase of revision, or when you want to start stepping up your revision. And you essentially want to give yourself not a sort of a very long period of very intense revision, because that's just not going to be particularly pleasant. So you might have, say, 1 week or 2 weeks of very intense revision, which is where you're going to be sort of making the most improvement. And then maybe a few days before the exam of slightly less intense revision, where you're maybe only doing, sort of a couple of hours a day of kind of going through questions. So it does depend quite heavily on that. It also depends on your kind of revision style. It also depends on if you've got other things going on. So I would say, to be safe, spread it out over at least kind of 6 weeks. And I'd say, starting off with no more than, sort of, you could probably get away with even sort of 5 hours a week to begin with, just kind of going through the basics and then kind of stepping that up. Some people say, sort of 8 hours a day. I don't think that's necessary, considering the whole exam itself is 2 hours. So 8 hours a day is the equivalent of 4 mocks a day, which I think is a bit excessive. And you would only really do that if you gave yourself kind of 2 weeks to do it all. So yeah, that's my attempt at giving as well-rounded an answer as I can on that, because it does depend on a lot of things. But yeah, I hope that was useful. And if you have any kind of follow-up questions from that, then feel free to kind of ask me. But yeah, I've tried to kind of give an answer that caters to most people's sort of disposition and where they're at. Sorry, I forgot to set the timer for this. That was quite a long answer as well. So how do I read, understand, and answer the question faster? I have no problem with maths. My problem is understanding what I have to do, interpreting the questions, etc. So firstly, some of it will come with time. Doing more practice questions, you'll begin to notice patterns in what they ask with questions. Some of it will come with sort of getting more used to seeing how they present information. So, if you see a graph, for example, you're probably going to have to be looking at certain parts of the graph, and so you'll get sort of quicker with that. But in my head, what I was kind of doing when I was sort of swatting up for this webinar and doing some of the questions, I essentially wanted to read the question and very quickly turn it into a problem that I could kind of understand in my own kind of easy words. So you essentially want to take their sort of very clunky way of building up the question and just put it into a very simple word problem or a very simple kind of equation, and kind of write this down on your whiteboard, and it should look like absolute nonsense by the time you're done. But while you're doing the questions, I think it's really useful to have that. So for example, if we go back to the slide on this question. So the way that they word the question is quite sort of clunky, and it's not very nice. So I would just very quickly kind of look at, okay, 12-week term, 2 cars, each weekday, and then 25 kilometers, and we want to know fuel consumption. So I would then just very quickly just write down sort of FC, so fuel consumption, equals, and then kind of go through the sentence again and pick out all the relevant information I need, and essentially distill that question down into a very easy word problem or equation. And that's probably the most efficient way of doing it without having to kind of keep on looking back at the question or makes kind of silly mistakes. So if you can start practicing that, so putting their questions into a format that you find very easy to follow, doing that very quickly, and ideally kind of writing that down on a sort of whiteboard or a piece of paper, then that's probably going to be the best approach in terms of getting used to doing these things very quickly. And then, as you said, the maths itself normally isn't that difficult. And so, once you've got a kind of easy problem that you can then do the calculations with, that part really shouldn't take too long. So I hope that answers your question and is somewhat useful. But that's genuinely the approach that I take. So that's probably the best advice that I can give, as well as just saying some of it will come with time and practice. And then okay, so the same question again. So and I think the one below that as well. I'll talk a little bit more as well about some other techniques that you can use. So one of them is kind of discarding answers that are kind of obviously wrong. So sometimes you'll get a question and you'll be able to tell that some of the questions are definitely wrong because they kind of fall outside of the range, or the answer has to be above a certain amount or below a certain amount. One of the answer options doesn't fit with this. And if you get to this point, then one thing you can do is kind of discard those answers, guess one of the other answers, and then flag it, and then move on to another question. Because some of them are going to be a bit harder than others. So that's one way for you to kind of reclaim some time back. And that's something that will sort of come with time. I think another thing is if you can get used to not falling into the trap of kind of half looking at the data and half reading the question. It's really difficult to do because when you're presented with some sort of graphic like a table or a graph or a chart, because it's more nicely presented than a block of text, we'll automatically try and look at it. But if you're looking at it, you're not reading the question. And if you're looking at it first, you don't know what information you'll need. So really get into the habit of, as soon as you kind of see the QR section starting, kind of switch on in your mind, okay, I need to start looking at the question first. Start to go through your head, okay, speed, distance, time, mean, median, mode, percentages, decimals. These are the kind of things that I need to be thinking about. And then as soon as you start the question, go straight away to the question stem. Try and break down the question stem into something that's quite easy for you to understand, and then go to whatever the kind of numerical information is. Pick out the information, do whatever the calculation is, and then mark the question. And then you'll just have to keep doing that over and over again. Which I appreciate isn't particularly pleasant, but that's probably the best approach for this section. So I hope that is useful. In terms of improving your mental maths, that there are lots of things online that can help you to do it. And ultimately it will be about proving kind of simple calculations. So yeah, I'm sure if you kind of Googled or even went on the App Store, some of you guys may know some good mental maths apps to help with this. And there are probably some UCAT apps as well, but obviously don't go for any that you sort of have to pay for, because there isn't really too much need in that. And then someone's asked some good calculator shortcuts to quickly do calculations. So I had a look at the calculator shortcuts, and I couldn't really find any that are kind of still going to be used. Some of you may know more on that. I know that you can use numlock, or at least you should be able to use numlock if your kind of device is compatible with it, and therefore be able to kind of type numbers in. But I'm not sure if there are any kind of operational shortcuts that are actually going to be used. So again, if anyone knows any more on that, I haven't seen anything on kind of the website or any other websites. So that would be kind of useful if anyone knows. Otherwise, I'll still keep an eye out, because these shortcuts are normally quite good. And someone's asked, is the whiteboard an actual whiteboard, or is it a laminated sheet of paper? So I think it somewhat depends on where you take it. But I think normally it is kind of like a sort of laminated sheet of paper. So it's not particularly nice, but it kind of works, as well as it sort of can. So I think it's very useful to have. And hopefully they will, considering the kind of difficulties last year with the UCAT, they'll hopefully be a bit nicer with you guys and provide some nicer stuff. But yes, okay. Let me mark that, and so we're going to go back and oh, nearly gave the question away. So we're going to do some more practice questions now. Let me just put my timer on. So it's a set of 4 questions from the same data set. So that's going to be just over 2 minutes, which I will just put on now. And what I'll do is kind of after 40 seconds, I'll switch to the next question. I know that's not necessarily exactly how you do it, but some of these are relatively easy. I wanted to kind of pitch it at a sort of easier level, so you'll see how you can quite quickly kind of be able to do some questions, hopefully. But I will start the timer in 3, 2. Oh, actually, hang on. Let me just give you some time in case you need to kind of get a calculator or a piece of paper, and then we'll start it. And again, feel free to kind of keep putting your questions on after this set of questions, and going through the answers. We'll go back and finish off with the Q&A. But yeah, now I will switch to the questions on 3, 2, 1. Okay, and that would just about be time. So that's an example of where you have the same data set, but you have 4 questions related to it. And those ones can actually be ever so slightly easier because as you kind of go through the questions, you understand a little bit more about the data set. You kind of get a bit more time with it compared to ones where it's just a standalone. So we'll go through the answers now. Thanks. I think someone put one of their answers in, which is good. Always nice to have some interaction. And yeah, as I said, hopefully that wasn't too difficult. Again, none of the calculations were that difficult, but I tried to sort of mimic the way that they really awkwardly word some questions, which can be really frustrating. But you know, it's something that you guys will have to sort of work through. So let's go through the answers now. So okay, so hopefully you can see the answers on the side. So no, this is question number 1. So it asks for a percentage decrease. So that's a very very specific kind of bit of excuse me, a bit of wording that you need to look for. And you know, essentially, this wanted you to add up the number of species on day 1 and add up the amount on day 2, and figure out what proportion it sort of decreased by. So that's, you know, essentially saying what do we have? What percentage of 30 do we have to take off to get to 22? Is essentially what it's saying. And so the answer is 26.7, and I've put a bit of a tip there. So this is something I used to do. If I wasn't too sure if an answer sounded right, I'd kind of see if it made sense. So, you know, 26.7, that's a bit over a quarter. Does that make sense in terms of the numbers? Well, a quarter of 30 is 7.5. So that's very close to 8. That's just under 8. So this answer does sort of make sense, you know, whereas if you somehow ended up with the answer of 55.6, for example, you would think, okay, that's over half. Over half of 30 is over 15. That doesn't seem right. I've done something wrong. And then you could kind of work out from there. So that's another kind of way in which you could sort of check your answer without necessarily having to go through the calculation again. But hopefully you guys got that right. And if not, you sort of knew what you needed to. What we needed to do. And again, remember the slides and recordings are available. So if you need to kind of look in more detail at the answers, then feel free to kind of check afterwards. They'll be available on the 6med website. So Cheyenne, I think you might have meant question 2 for this, and well done for getting it right. So this one is talking about the increase in proportions. So they tend to do this sometimes. They will kind of add in new information, and then you'll have to do things with the new information along with the kind of numerical information you've been given. So again, you know, just making sure you're getting straight in your mind which day you're referring to, making sure it's looking at the beetles, and then making sure that you're okay with your kind of proportions. And Cheyenne, so we're actually not too far from being done. We've got about kind of 15 minutes left if my voice holds up. But the recordings and slides will be available. And also in the tip here, I said what I mentioned before. So we know that it says the number of beetles was increased. So the answer definitely can't be 6 because that's less than 9. So if you were kind of stuck for time or you wanted to you know, guess an answer, then you could kind of disregard A and pick from the others. And obviously, if you kind of get rid of one answer option, then your kind of chance goes from, you know, 20% to 25%. And if you can get rid of 2, it goes up to 33%. So, you know, those little margins might sort of help you to get those higher scores. And then the third, let me just check the chat. So because it says the same proportion as the day 1 to day 2 increase in spiders, and the spiders went from 3 to 5, so that's why you do 5 over 3. because that's essentially saying, that's the sort of rate of increase. No problem. So the third question, so the answer is C. So again, this one, I actually felt kind of mean because I deliberately worded this in a bit of a tricky way. And again, this is what I mean about my tip of sort of taking the question stem and kind of bringing it into some sort of equation or kind of single sentence that sort of makes sense to you in terms of specifically what you need to find. So here you needed to kind of work out what the 2-day mean is. The numbers aren't very difficult. You don't even need to do kind of 7 plus 3 over 2. You can just kind of visualize 3 and 7 and know that 5 is in the middle. And therefore, you know that the mean for the spiders is going to have to be 5. So between day 1, day 2, and now day 3, the total must be 15. It must be 7 for day 3. There must be 7 spiders, and then you just do the increase of 5 to 7, and the percentage increase is 2 over 5, which is 40%. Again, you could kind of look at E and think you can disregard that because it's not going to be over 100% increase. Yeah, again, this is just somewhere where you'll need to sort of keep everything sorted in your head and make sure you're not kind of confusing which things you're looking at. And then the final one, they tend to sort of do this as well. They'll kind of mix up percentages and proportions and fractions and decimals. So yeah, this was just about making sure that you know which one to discard, making sure you're looking in the right area. So you discard spiders because they increase, and it asks you of the species that decreased, and so it's going to be 3 out of the total of the column of day 2, but you can disregard the spiders, so that gets you 3 out of 17. So hopefully nothing too conceptually difficult, but with the sort of time pressure, and if you didn't really have a sort of efficient way of kind of tackling the questions, you can very easily kind of get tripped up by the wording and have to read it sort of multiple times, and therefore kind of lose a bit of time that way. So that was the kind of practice questions. We're now going to go back to the Q&A. Again, I'll give you guys a little bit of time just to add any more questions you want. Upvote any questions you kind of want me to answer, and remember that it can be sort of about anything. So if you want to ask about the personal statement or interviews, BMAT, UCAT, what it's like to be a medical student, anything at all, then feel free to kind of pop that down, and I will give you. I'll give kind of a minute for you guys to add anything you need, and I will try and let my voice hold up for this time period. Okay, so let's go through them. I was just having a look to see if there were any updates on the UCAT thing with any sort of anything to do with like the note, the whiteboard, or the calculator, or anything like that. And I can't really see any updates. Okay, So what length of time should you spend studying for the BMAT? So I did kind of go through that before. I guess I could kind of answer this from a slightly different point of view, which is kind of comparing it to the UCAT, because the BMAT's obviously a very different test. It's still quite time pressured, but it's less about that. The BMAT is kind of more conceptually difficult, and so it's very much about understanding what each of the types of questions are, what you could actually be asked, and that information isn't really available in too many places. I kind of went through all of them in the masterclass videos that I sort of set up last year, which are available on the website. But I know that not everyone will have the money to get them. So I would recommend kind of going through the sort of syllabus that they have, and also they give a kind of overview of the sort of question types, and exactly what can kind of be addressed in each of them. And so that's what's going to take most of the time is the actual conceptual aspects, and potentially some revision of things. So for example, I didn't do physics A levels, so I had to revise physics for my BMAT, which was very fun. And yeah, so in terms of what length of time you should spend kind of studying for it, I guess it would be similar. You'd want to break it down into kind of the basics of what you need to know, then start to familiarize yourself with the question types, then start to do example questions, and then start to do kind of timed questions. So again, you want to spread it out over at least kind of 4 to 6 weeks. I think with the BMAT, maybe even slightly more, because it's more sort of, you can't really just hammer out lots of questions and get used to pattern recognition. You do actually need to kind of understand a little bit more about how to tackle these questions. So yeah, I would say kind of similar, but maybe even a little bit more time on the BMAT. And if you're doing both, then you'll have to bear in mind that you may be spending several hours a day split between the two of them. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say to that. But again, because these questions are quite nuanced, I don't want to give any kind of definitive answers of hours per day, because it will differ between people. So yeah, I hope you don't think I'm being sort of non-committal with that. Okay, is there a list of the topics for QR? I think so. So the kind of skills that I mentioned, they definitely provide that information. And then I definitely kind of included a list on the master classes. So I would imagine I would have got that from the website. So there should be something there. If you kind of go into the UCAT website, go into the bit where they talk about subtests, and they give some information there. And then also, I think if you go onto the kind of part where you can look at examples of kind of questions, they give a bit more information there. But I'm not sure if there's a kind of definitive list of, these are all of the topics that you could have. But I will just go back to that slide just to kind of summarize this one here. So in terms of kind of skills that you need to know, the main ones are percentages, proportions and ratios, rates and averages. And then in terms of kind of the actual way in which it's presented, you'll need to know kind of how to interpret, graphs, charts, potentially things like pie charts as well. I mean, that'll be useful for other sections, and things like Venn diagrams as well. That'll be useful for other sections. But this tends to be more kind of charts and kind of bar graphs and line graphs and scatter graphs and that sort of thing. So yeah, that will kind of cover most of it, and then hopefully there'll be something on the website. If not, then if you have a bit of money, feel free to check out the masterclass. I'll see if I can get like a screen grab or something from that. I'm not sure what the kind of legality of that is, but something from that to maybe show at the next webinar. So yeah, hopefully that will be useful. What would you say is a maximum number of questions we should flag in one section to be time efficient? That is a good question, because I think flagging is useful if either you spent too long on a question already, or if you identify it early on as being quite a difficult question. So I'd say, if you think about it, you have 24 minutes for this section. So if you're someone who needs more sort of closer to a minute per question for this, then I guess you technically want to flag kind of what is that sort of 12 questions in order to kind of get the questions down to kind of 24 full questions for you to do in roughly sort of 24 minutes. So it kind of depend on that. I'd say you don't want to be flagging too many because you want to be sure of as many questions as you can. But I think flagging kind of 6 or 7 questions in this section would be perfectly fine. Because ultimately this is a section that students do tend to kind of struggle in because of the time pressure, and some people aren't as good with maths, so you don't necessarily have to score as highly compared to some of the others. But again, it's kind of nuanced. I don't want to give necessarily a definitive answer and kind of disappoint anyone. But yeah, I would say it's perfectly fine to kind of do that and use it well. So don't necessarily flag a question if you kind of spent 20 seconds on it and you're still kind of working through it. Give yourself a little bit more time and sort of make sure you use the flagging well. And if you see a question which just has lots of kind of information to process, I'd almost be tempted to kind of experiment flagging them straight away in your practices and seeing how that works, because some of them really will just take 25 or 30 seconds just to actually get your head around what's actually being presented and what to actually do. And obviously it's not really feasible for you to necessarily do the question in the remaining sort of 10 or 15 seconds. Yeah, and you'll probably get, maybe 2 or 3 of those, maybe 4 or 5 if you're unlucky, of those really big sort of bumper questions that are very difficult. And so, if you end up flagging all of those, then that's absolutely fine, because chances are you will have saved time for the remaining kind of 32 questions, which will all be easier. So that's my answer to that. Is 4 weeks enough time to prepare if you've already sat it before? So if you sat it before, that will definitely kind of take some time off your preparation. You'll know the basics of it. You will have kind of retained some of that information from sitting it before. You'll know kind of the format a bit more. You'll hopefully will have kind of developed some of these skills and techniques from beforehand. So yes, it whether it's enough time or not obviously depends on kind of what you do with it. But is that a decent amount of time? I'd say probably yes. If you're kind of efficient with it and you kind of work out exactly what you need to do. If maybe if your UCAT was not as strong last time, if where you need to kind of dedicate more of your time, are there particular sections or is it more of a sort of general thing? Then yeah, 4 weeks should be plenty of time. I mean, that's the equivalent of pretty much a week per section, and then a bit of SJT or whatever, which is plenty of time if you've done it before. And I can see quite a few questions in the chat. If you could pop them onto Slido, that would be useful. I attend Peterhouse to Esher, which is very good college. I would recommend. Can I apply with the same personal statement to both an engineering school and a med school? So yes, I think you can. Obviously, they'll sort of know if you write a med personal statement, the engineering school will kind of know that. It's never a good idea to try and write one to kind of cater for both. I think in some instances, because I think this question was asked before, and some students said that you can sometimes kind of give a separate personal statement, but I'm not entirely sure when that's possible and how that's done. I think that would be something to ask your school, and also potentially to ask UCAS, and to see if you can submit a separate personal statement. But yes, you can absolutely apply to 2 completely different kind of schools and submit the same personal statement. One of my friends applied to dentistry and petroleum engineering, and just used the same personal statement. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. Are the 6 med mocks a good representation of what you would get in the actual UCAT? So I have been told yes by impartial students who have used them. I think the sort of difficulty level is quite similar. I think the format is quite similar. Obviously, the questions will never be exactly the same because they're obviously not allowed to be. But yes, I have been told they are a good representation. I think also, some of the other big question banks are also quite good as well. So, I know that I work for 6med, but feel free if you kind of like the look of another one, then feel free to go for it. But I wouldn't be put off by thinking that the 6med ones are bad. I think the Ninja is generally very well received, and most students actually don't use all of the questions. They don't answer all of the questions on the Ninja. So that's something to bear in mind if you're kind of thinking, oh, this one has kind of more questions compared to this one. I'd say go for the sort of actual quality of the questions, and you can sort of tell if you read them which ones kind of match the actual ones more closely. And you can have a look at a kind of mock tests on the actual UCAT website to see what sort of style they have for their question. So yeah. Has the calculator been changed? No, so I just more meant I haven't seen any kind of updates or anything in terms of calculator shortcuts or anything. They don't really have much in terms of calculator shortcuts. I think they have some memory ones maybe, but yeah, and then they have kind of general shortcuts to kind of flag and skip. So I think it's like Alt and F to flag, and probably Alt and S to skip, or Alt N to go on to the next question, that sort of thing. But no, I don't think that the calculator has been changed. Sorry to worry you. How much free time do you roughly get as a med student at Cambridge? So early on, not too much. You definitely have time to pursue hobbies, but you can't exactly be spending your time doing lots of non-medical things. So in first year, for example, a typical day can easily have 5 or 6 hours of kind of lectures and supervisions. You can start at kind of 8 or 9 in the morning and not really have a break until the evening. So that'll be something to bear in mind. Weekends you'll generally spend doing a bit of work, but obviously making some time for yourself as well. You get more time in third year. That's when you do your sort of intercalated degree. So you'll depending on what you do, you'll generally have more time. And then during the clinical years, so fourth year, fifth year and sixth year, things tend to get a little bit more flexible. You can kind of manage your time a bit more. Things are less sort of compulsory as a whole. So yeah, you kind of get more time as the years go up, and you obviously get more sort of efficient with your time. But starting off, it's pretty difficult to hold down more than say 2 regular hobbies. And if you do one kind of big hobby, so say if you play a sport to a very high level, or if you want to do rowing or something like that, there's not really too much time for much else, which is kind of fair enough, but something to sort of bear in mind as well. So how do you balance studying for BMAT and UCAT, also in terms of hours? So I think it depends on firstly when you're sitting them. So some people prefer to sit them kind of far apart so that you get time in between. So for example, if you did your UCAT quite early and then you did the kind of later BMAT, you'd have all of that time in between to focus on the BMAT, and you'd mainly only just do a little bit beforehand and focus on the UCAT. If you're doing them both kind of together, then I think the best way would just be to kind of separate your day out, and maybe say I'm going to do kind of UCAT in the morning and BMAT in the afternoon, and kind of swap it over every now and again, or to kind of work through it based on sort of sections, and just build yourself a little timetable to make sure that you're covering everything that you need to cover. And that can actually be quite good, because you can actually be kind of doing different things and breaking your day up. So you could spend the morning doing verbal reasoning, for example, which is very kind of looking at sort of words and arguments and text, and then you could spend the afternoon doing say section 2, so working on your maths or your biology or whatever. So something quite different. And then obviously that can be quite good in terms of keeping things fresh and making sure it's not kind of getting stagnant or you're getting burnt out. But the other thing you could do is there is a little bit of overlap with some bits of the UCAT and BMAT, so you could easily kind of combine some of it. So some of the section 1 overlaps a bit with things like verbal reasoning and decision making. Some of the maths will obviously overlap a little bit, so you could potentially do that. But I'm someone who would prefer to kind of keep things separate. So yeah, I think kind of spreading out your day like that would be good. So yeah, some tips on writing a really good personal statement. So I have written a kind of personal statement series of blog posts on the 6med website, which I think is a really good kind of starting point, including the most common mistakes people make. I think that the first thing is remembering it's a personal statement. So you want to make things as tailored to you as possible. Remember that even if it doesn't feel like it, you will have your own kind of unique circumstances, your own kind of unique perspectives on whatever kind of work experience you've done and whatever projects you've done. I think it's a really good opportunity to kind of give your own personal reflections. So, starting off with just your reasons for studying medicine and backing it up with some sort of experience you've had is just a really solid way to start it. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular. It doesn't have to be, saying that you wanted to do it for a very long time. Just putting in sort of simple words why medicine is the right career path for you, and then give an example of kind of some evidence that you've seen to back this up. So something you might have seen in work experience or a project you've done, some reading you've done, and then kind of go through and make sure that you kind of try and link things together. Use just really simple, clear English, and just explain. This is kind of the skill. This is kind of the evidence. This is how it links to medicine. And kind of use that. And make sure to kind of finish off with some kind of personal hobbies and interests to kind of really put yourself as a sort of unique individual in the sort of interviewer's mind. Some little bits that they'll want to kind of ask you about and want to kind of invite you to interview for. I think that's probably the best approach. So can you bring your own whiteboard and pen in the exam? So if it's at the Pearson View Centres, they will provide you with them. I think just because of worrying about kind of cheating and things, but I'm not entirely sure how that works, because if you're sitting at home, they do allow you to kind of have your own whiteboard and pen. I think you just have to kind of show that it's blank, and which is a bit silly. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't think you can bring your own. You'll have to use their ones. Make sure the pens work beforehand. Make sure the whiteboard is sturdy and works and doesn't have anything. If it has something written on it, kind of flag that up to them before the exam, just to as in if it's got something like scratched into it, for example, just to kind of show them that you haven't done that yourself, just to stay on the right side of them. Oh, I have just realized I've gone quite a bit over. Apologies for that. And sorry that there are still lots of questions left. I would encourage you, if you have any that you want to be answered, send them to team@6med.co.uk. Someone there has said, will the recording be available? Yes, it will. And the slides will be available as well. They'll be available on the website. I think it'll be, if you go onto the website, it'll either be on the homepage, or if you go onto the kind of UCAT menu bar, it will show up when the next webinar will be, which I think will be in sort of 2 weeks' time. And it will hopefully have the kind of download link there for the slides and the recording, which should be up kind of in a few hours' time. So yeah, but thank you guys for attending. I hope you've enjoyed your weekend, and hope this has been useful. Yes, I do know Dr. Ross Russell. He's my Director of Studies. So yeah, thank you so much, and I will see you on the next webinar. And take care.